This episode, your idea could make you wealthy. Well, up here in Alaska, we had a bunch of people come stay with us last week, and this is kind of the genesis of this show. This group came in; they were doing basically a kind of a, I guess you'd call it a business conference, but they all work in the laundry business, not a glamorous business, right? But a whole bunch of really, really successful guys and outstanding people, by the way. Oh my God, we never had so much fun. Anyway, be that as it may, Johnny found this article in the Wall Street Journal, and it was kind of spurred by this conversation about these guys that came up here to stay with us last week. And the article's called Meet the Stealthy Wealthy. And Johnny will cite that in a minute. But with that, we think your ideas can make you wealthy. Welcome to the Handyman Pros Radio Show, home improvement and maintenance tips from the pros. Thanks for listening to another edition of the Handyman Pros Radio Show, where our goal is to help save you time, money, and aggravation in your home maintenance and repair. This edition is entitled, Your Ideas Can Make You Wealthy. And I am here with my ever-cheerful co-host, old buddy John. Johnny, what has been going on? What's been going on in Atlanta? I am far away.
Well, you know what? It's been raining a lot, which kept me inside. I did get a chance to do a couple of things, some actual work items inside. But I just did complete my dehumidifier build.
Oh, exciting!
Yeah, of all
that's
that.
a show. We're doing a show.
So I'll have to. I'll have to go back and put all that back together, but it worked as planned, and so last night was the first night I just let her run, baby, and it's pumping out, and I don't have to worry about it right now, which is great. So
no more hearing the beeps in the middle of the night. Yeah,
bingo.
Understood. Hey, Johnny, something's happening here in Gustavus today that's very, very rare. I'm trying to figure out what that big orange ball in the sky is.
Yeah.
The sun is out. And
So I was going to say that when Larry and I were talking, you called me up the other day. I was in Lowe's or Home Depot, of course, and you were saying that it's been raining a lot, so it kind of is delayed some things for you up there. Otherwise, we would be following this build. But
yes,
you did
the
have
rain has been.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just been slowing us up. I was trying to glue 2 layers of subfloor together, and I couldn't get a day. I mean, it took me extremely a long time just to get the 2 pieces together because the plywood was so wet. I didn't dare try to glue it with the plywood soaking wet. So I finally got that together. Now we're into a staining issue, and of course it's the same issue, trying to get enough time to where we're got time that's dry enough. It's probably going to change how we do this whole thing. We're going to probably move the lumber. We do have a metal building, but it's pretty far away from the job site. But I think we're going to move the lumber up to the metal building to actually get it stained, because it's right now that's holding up the project. So anyway, it's just logistics here in Gustavus, all having to do with weather. It's been pretty wet there too, though, hasn't it?
Oh yeah, it's been raining. It's been raining nonstop. I'm trying to actually pressure wash and stain the deck there, but I can't string together 4 days of dry weather, which I really would like to have. So anyways, and then you told me about some of these guys that you met up there in this the laundromat business. And that
they do the it's the laundry business now. So a bunch of them own laundries. They own laundries or they install laundries.
Got it.
They do, but they also do big commercial laundries, like hospitals and any place, like all these places, hotels, hospitals, all this kind of stuff, big commercial operations, and they're basically installers of equipment. And with any luck, I've already asked a couple of them. We could do an interview with them, because guess what, John? They have a problem in
the actual installations
and getting technicians.
Yeah.
Right. So again, for our handy people out there, here's a potential business opportunity for you: is get in with these guys if you can do these installs. And I was listening to them. Nothing, how do I want to say it? Nothing that's over the top difficult to do. You're dealing with basically some electrical, some plumbing, a little bit of concrete work because they do bolt these big boys down to the concrete. Now these aren't the great big ones. These are more like the laundromats or
Yeah.
like, and we did an install here. So I was actually listening to talk about doing an install after 40 years. They finally replaced their washer and dryer. And actually, believe it or not, that's the average length of these commercial units in a place like this. It's 30 or 40 years. So pretty good stuff. It's pricey, this isn't stuff that you do at home, but they come in and they bolt it to the concrete and, da 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 da. And so it's just kind of, well, it's the purpose for this show. It's a little niche business, right?
Yeah.
It's a little
Yeah.
niche business.
So what you were telling me about that, I ran across an article in the news, and it was called Meet the Stealthy Wealthy Who Make Their Money the Boring Way. And this appeared in the Wall Street Journal, I think about 3 weeks ago. And the story is by Juliet Chung. So I wanted to cite this article before we move on here. But it's just interesting. You just never know how you can make money.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And there's so many ways, right?
Exactly.
If you think about it, every single thing that you have has been made by somebody, and some of those things are very, very like small, like gaskets and things like that. Like that somebody made that stuff, somebody came up with a way to produce it. It's not all these mega corporations. And this article that John's referring to talks about a bunch of different things, but it does talk about weather tech, and it talks about several different types of businesses, and we'll refer to some of these, but the weather tech story is fascinating. The owner of WeatherTech is off in Scotland one day, and he happens to notice the highly ribbed, high quality floor mats. So he contacts the Scottish manufacturer and ships them over by the container, puts a second mortgage on his house, and sells them like crazy. First year makes $40,000. Well, you say 40 grand, not a big deal. Second year, what was it, Johnny? 120, something like that.
I'll have to dig that.
Don't the numbers aren't critical.
Well, the point is, so let me pull the direct quote. So you're correct to this point, and his quote was, "By the end of 91, I made $40,000. By the end of 92, I made $160,000.
Yep.
By the end of 93, I made $400,000."
Yeah, that's a kind of good progression.
Yeah. And it says, while all this was going on, if you called my 800 number at 3 a.m, you know who would answer it? I would.
Him. Yeah.
So This is the kind of thing, from a commitment standpoint of, you got to bust your butt to make these things work. But however, his business now is, he employs 1,800 people, and he's expecting an $800 million revenue for the company this year.
Yep. And yes, it took him a long time, and we understand that, but he just was a guy who saw a really good idea and then figured it out and made it work. And so that's one of the things that you never know, right, John?
Yeah, that's the point of it. The article really starts out with, this describing a gentleman that he dreamed of having his own business, like most of our listeners, maybe that are out there.
Right.
I want my own business, and decades later, here he is, and how he did it was that he invented, a machine to rip up flooring like carpeting in elementary schools. And who knew elementary schools have it says here, about 7 miles of carpet that have to be replaced almost every year because kids destroy all the carpet, or it gets pretty nasty with all the kids.
Are gross.
Yeah.
Gross.
So here he is, and in a few years he saw a niche, he filled it, and now he's making.
And he worked out a system to make it really fast and efficient, right? So he developed this piece of equipment. And that's kind of one of the things that I wrote this in our notes. Your hack, as it were, could be worth a ton of money, right? So if you figured out something, some way to do something better, right? And it could be anything. I saw this guy. There's, if you go on Amazon, there's this guy that has these, he has a manufacturing company, and he makes under sink mounts, right? If you've ever had a sink that's fallen down, the glues come undone around the edge. He makes these they're basically a turnbuckle with a
Yeah.
mounting system. This is nothing amazing, but brother, when you need that part to fix a sink, and it fixes it, it pushes the corners up and you can re-glue it, and it just, you turn that thing up and it doesn't go anywhere and it won't come down. I don't know if he's made $1 million, made a huge amount of wealth from it, but I know he's done okay. And I think the company's called Fabricators for Fabricators. Anyway, be that as it may, this idea is basically the hack. He said, I mean, I can tell because he's like, if I had a turnbuckle with 2 flat plates on it, I could mount one to the cabinet and push the other one up against the sink. I'd be in business.
Exactly. And this is the kind of thing, so when all of us, handymen or whatever you guys might do out there in the trades, you're got a lot of time to think while you're doing things, You just, you just,
come up with a way, right?
Yeah,
you come up with a way.
Yeah, you either have a way of making something, or offering another service, goods or services, right? That people want, and once you're on that track, you can be off to the races at that point.
Yeah, you can. And what I like to call it too, if you find a particular customer that you really relate well to, and you provide that kind of that service niche, go deep in that, right? Because one of the other things this article says is that a lot of these people that make significant wealth are regional, like distributors or regional suppliers. So they don't just sit in their town. They do this same job over a larger region, a state or a couple of states. And I found that with these laundry guys, almost all of these laundry guys that were up here had multiple state distribution. They got really good at their jobs. And they just expanded. They said, like one of the guys I was talking to, he's based out of Arkansas. He's super good, got really super smart, super good, great marketer guy, Johnny. You'd really like him. But he just opened an office in, I think he's got one in Nashville now, and he's out of Arkansas. So he's got 3 offices. I can't remember where the second one is, but it's regional, right? So he's got Arkansas, he's got Nashville, and there's one somewhere in between. I can't remember. But doesn't matter. But he's gone regional with it. And he's just taking his business and scaling it a little bit, and just saying, hey, we can do all these same things here, and then we can duplicate it and put it over here. And that's what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, back to kind of that point is, you just never know where you can make money. And I've always been amazed. I mean, this article, I'm not going to go through the entire thing here, but it does cite, some of the wealth managers that work with these guys, and they're often surprised at where all this money is coming from. How they can build, these big family businesses and become part of the American economy. And
these are like fund managers. These are
so it says, an interesting part of the little paragraph here, it says the largest source of income for the 1% highest earners in the US isn't being a partner at an investment bank or launching a 1 in a million tech startup. It's owning a medium size regional business, which you just cited, Larry, and says many of them are distinctly boring and extremely lucrative.
Yeah,
like auto dealerships, beverage distributors, grocery stores, dental practices, and law firms.
Yep.
So it's just, it's just very interesting because, and I'm sure folks, especially, when I know Larry and I, when we're going out to different homes and things like that, I always ask, I kind of pry a little bit in my own little way, so, hey, what do you do for a living? I'm just always amazed. I'm like, good for you, man. This is awesome.
I mean, Johnny, when I met you, I asked that question. You said male prostitute. I couldn't
Right.
believe it. I was like, really?
Well, there's all
Wow.
kinds of ways of making money, So, it's just really interesting. And that's kind of what I got, out of, every time I go to these places, you just never know who does
You never
what.
know. No. And the other thing is, I'm going to say, gosh, this is the old sales guy in me, right?
Yeah.
But talk to everybody and don't make assumptions, right? Because this is just an old sales story. I'll never forget. I'm driving down in what is called Shake Rag, right, Johnny? You know where Shake Rag was. Well, at that time, Shake Rag was just basically like, how do you want to say it? It was pretty rural, quite honestly. And I pull up around these two guys are standing around a burn barrel in the middle of a big yard, and they're burning trash. And I'm like, oh, I'm pulling in here to talk to these guys, right? So I pull into the truck, and I was selling trucks at the time, and I pull in to talk to them, and I'm like, I'm just like, I just was like, I'm just going to take a shot at it. Well, long story short, they had just sold several hundred acres of land, and they were sitting on about $7.5 million, and they're sitting there stirring the trash with a stick, both these guys. And I'm like, man, don't ever
there's something
anybody,
to be, yeah. Well,
right?
yeah, humble. They're still humble after.
This whole group
Wealth
of guys we had here
hasn't deteriorated their humility.
right. All these guys that we had here were all super like cool guys. I mean, nobody had heirs, nobody, and some of them, Johnny, were really substantial. I mean, I'm like, oh, okay. Like,
yeah, I mean,
you start asking the questions, and you're like, yikes! This guy's got one of the fellows had 13 locations. That's
well,
I didn't have to do the numbers to know it was substantial. You know what I mean?
But you're absolutely right. You ask people what they might be doing, or you look at some people and you're like, here's maybe a guy in his 50s that's hanging around the beach, right? What do you do?
Right.
Yeah. I invented this and I'm done.
Brings up another story that I have. So we're down in the Keys. I'm with my parents. This is back when I was 20, in my 20s. I'm down in the Keys. We're out at dinner. My dad says, "Oh, you need to meet this guy." So we meet this guy, and Dad says, this guy says to me, my dad had already asked the question. Says this, you don't know who this guy is, do you? I said, no, I have no idea. He said, that's the guy that came up with the Marlboro Man cigarette ad campaign. Right?
It's just incredible. So
nicest guy, right? And
right.
You're sitting there going, this guy made an icon in America, and he got paid very, very well. He worked on Madison Avenue, at the time, came up with the Marlboro Man. Truly an American, maybe not so much anymore, but at the time,
something right out of Mad Men.
Sure, absolutely. Oh yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
And got compensated with one other thing. So this is another story. One time I was actually talking to a guy who built gun ranges, of all the indoor gun ranges, and he made a very appropriate comment. And I've found this to be true in another industry too. But he said, there's just absolutely a whole ton of money to be made in businesses that nobody else wants to deal with. In his case, it was dealing with lead abatement, right? So toxic chemicals, right? And I would say that's the same thing of my experience with the septic industry, the septic pumpers, the guys that pump out septic tanks. Nobody wants to do that business, but I will tell you those businesses do extremely well, and they get paid well. And yes, the work is nasty, but guess what? To them, and they'll tell you this. You ask your septic pumper, the owner, what's the smell of septic, and he'll say, smells like money.
Money. I mean, it doesn't take you long when you start to think this way. Because I went down to when I was living in Florida. There's all those the great big yachts and stuff that are floating around there, and you just have to. What in the hell did that guy or girl do to earn that kind of money, and it's just the weirdest, the weirdest things, you just never think of it. So, that's why when you were mentioning this the other day, I was like, if you're out doing all this handyman work and everybody's handy, obviously, and you can kind of start to put these things together. You never know what you can come up with.
You never know. Don't discount anything,
And,
right?
and write it down too, or
And
speak,
write it down. Oh,
however
yeah.
you do
Or
that,
make a note or
remember.
however you do it. Put it,
Right.
yeah, in your phone, whatever, right? Write it down. Yeah,
Ex-
note it, and act on it. If you
right.
think you can.
Exactly. So, hey folks, good luck out there, Maybe one of you guys will be like this guy at WeatherTech. He enjoys flying his Gulfstream.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, what's that?
Let's go, Johnny.
$50 million in the airplane, right? So,
Well, hey, it's it is that whole thing that when you get to those levels, when you make large amounts of money, your life is different in that sense. But to him, he likes to fly, right,
yeah,
John?
yeah,
And that guys that like to fly, yeah, he might fly a Gulfstream, but he likes to fly, so he'd fly a 172 also. He doesn't care, right?
right.
He likes to fly. I mean, all these airline pilots that we see at these RC events, right? Look at the number. They're enthralled with flying, right? So they fly remote control, they fly full scale, they fly. They fly whenever they can, they fly whatever they can, and that's just it is what it
Yeah,
is. I'd like to have a Gulfstream, be able to afford a Gulfstream, and just do my private piloting in a Gulfstream. Be kind of cool, I think.
yeah.
I don't
I
know.
mean, good. It's good. It's good fortune. It's a lot of hard work, and
It's a lot
congratulations
of
to these
hard work.
folks.
Don't you ever think that these people don't work hard for their
Yeah,
money.
that's
Don't
right.
you ever
Well,
think
I
that?
think that's one of the lines here in that article was, it could be 3 a.m. Guess who answered the phone? It was me.
a guy at
So
WeatherTech, yeah.
it takes a extreme commitment to get these things done. But once you get over that hump,
One last parting statement. And this, I don't remember who said this, but I want to think it was Brian Tracy or maybe Zig Ziglar or somebody, but it was one of the successful guys who said, understand that real success comes dressed in work clothes.
right? Yep,
Right?
yep.
Real success comes dressed in work clothes.
There you go.
So there
All
you
right,
go. Johnny, do you think the aliens work hard? Well, I know in your case they do.
I was wondering, since you're up in the middle of nowhere, how's the alien situation up there?
Johnny, I'm going to be honest. I haven't seen an alien yet. I'm still looking for Bigfoot. I'm trying to keep my eyes open for Bigfoot. No sightings that I'm aware of, but
you know what? Maybe at at dawn you go traipsing around through the forest and see what comes after you.
Yeah, I'm afraid to know what that is because here. So I have to share this with y'all. Okay, so y'all, and I say y'all meaning the audience in general. There's a couple of things about living in Alaska that are actually kind of cool, right? So there's no snakes here. There's no ticks here. So for living in Georgia, of course, you don't walk through tall grass, right? We don't have any problems with tall grass here because there's no snakes, there's no ticks. The number of poisonous plants is very, very minor. They're very large, for lack of a better word. But some of the locals say this. The great thing about here is anything that can hurt you, you can see it.
Yeah.
You can see it, right?
It's probably
so,
3 to 800 pounds.
It is, or more.
Yeah,
or more. That's more. A small one, Johnny.
Yeah.
Like yeah. So and the thing they say is, the things around here that can hurt you will eat you.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's or run you over. In the case of a moose, they'll just run you over.
Right.
So anyway, but it's been a very hard adaptation to be walking through this tall grass. And you know what I'm talking about, and not worry about ticks and or freaking snakes, because there's no snakes, and there's a few spiders here, but they're not. I don't think any of them are poisonous. So, anyway, it's a different.
Well, you've
really
got different. But the one thing that is bad up there, though, right, is the mosquitoes.
They are a little.
It is incredible that the range of mosquitoes, all the way from the equator to Alaska. Those things are everywhere.
And the ones here, John, are big.
Yeah, they're big.
I mean, they're big in size. Like the biggest annoying. I've worn the head net a couple of times doing the sauna build because they're flying in front of your face and they're honestly very visually distracting. They're so big that they're like, and I've sucked a couple of them in breathing which is not a whole lot
Yeah,
of
those
fun,
things.
you know?
I remember my buddy up there used to tell me about them.
Yep.
No, thanks.
State bird of Alaska, as they like to say, the mosquito, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway. All right. Questions, comments, concerns, send us an email, questions at Handyman Pros Radio Show. We are out there on Facebook. Folks, I am posting a lot of pictures on our group at Handyman Pros on Facebook. I'm also doing them at my personal one. It's Larry Towner. If you want to look, I'm try to post at least once a week. I'll kind of a compilation of pictures. Got some great fish pictures. Some of the guys went out and did some halibut fishing and got some big ones. I mean, there was one that was 71 inches long, and which is a big one. It probably weighed, I don't know, it was well over 200 pounds because it took two guys to lift it up out of the water. So anyway, it's all out there on Facebook. So,
and he did it for the halibut.
For the halibut. Oh, Johnny, you're killing me.
Well, I said that on purpose, don't you know? There's some Alaska jokes for you. Okay.
And
all
with
right,
that,
folks.
Johnny, take us home, baby.
All right, folks. Have a great week. Thanks for listening to the Handyman Pros Radio Show, and we'll see you next time on the Handyman Pros Radio Show.